All right, let's dive into one of the biggest economic matchups out there, China versus India. Now, this is a story we all think we know, right? But trust me, there's a huge twist hiding just beneath the surface. So, let me ask you, when you picture this economic race, who's winning? I'm guessing for most of us, the answer is just obvious, right? It's gotta be China, and probably by a mile. All the headlines, all the data, it all seems to scream China. And, the usual evidence is pretty convincing. By 2017, China's GDP per capita had shot up to over $8,000. That's a massive number that seems to prove they're the undisputed economic powerhouse. And then you look at India in that same year, and their number is just under $2,000. So you see these two figures side by side, and yeah, the case looks pretty much closed. It seems like a total blowout, a clear story of China's incredible success. This is the story we all know, the dragon's roar. But what if there's a fundamental problem with how we're even measuring this race in the first place? What if this whole time we've been starting the stopwatch at the wrong moment? I mean, comparing countries year by year, what economists call chronological time, might not be the right way to see who's really making faster progress. To really get what's going on, we need to completely reframe how we look at this. It's not one single timeline. It's actually a tale of two timelines, each with its own unique starting point. And that's where this key idea of development time comes in. Instead of looking at, say, the year 2005 for both countries, we should compare them from the moment each one hit the go button on their major economic reforms. This is what really levels the playing field. So here's how that works. We set China's time zero, or year one, to 1978. That's when their big reforms kicked off. For India, time zero doesn't happen until 13 years later, in 1991. So if we want to compare how they were both doing 27 years into their journey, we're not looking at the same calendar date. We're actually comparing China in 2004 to India in 2017. And when you do that, well, look at this. It's incredible. When you adjust for development time and inflation, their GDP per capita after 27 years of reform was practically identical. China was at about $1,797, and India was at $1,780. All of a sudden, that blowout race looks like a photo finish, doesn't it? But here's the thing. This wild parallel isn't just some statistical quirk you find in GDP. It actually holds up when you look at other, arguably more important measures, the ones that show the real human impact of all this economic change. For example, let's step away from the abstract world of GDP for a second. What happens when we look at something like the poverty rate? This gives us a really direct look at how the lives of the most vulnerable people in each country were actually changing. And get ready for this, because it's another shocker. 22 years into their respective reforms, India's poverty rate was nearly half of what China's was at a similar point in its development. Let me say that again. India was actually doing a significantly better job of lifting its people out of extreme poverty. And listen, this isn't some fringe theory. As Martin Rama, a top economist at the World Bank, put it, for a solid quarter of a century, you could argue that India was actually outperforming China. This whole idea is based on some serious economic digging. So, the big question is, how is this possible? If they were basically running neck and neck for so long, what on earth explains their different paths? Well, the answer comes down to one crucial thing: how each country decided to invest in its human capital, its people. See, the two nations took completely opposite approaches. China went for a bottom-up strategy. Their focus was on mass primary education, making sure everyone got the basics. India, on the other hand, went top-down. They prioritized creating elite universities for a select few, while mass education was put on the back burner. China's approach was really quantity first. They poured everything into basic education, and it worked. By the 1980s, their adult illiteracy rate was down to just 22%. They also put a huge emphasis on practical, vocational, and technical skills. They were basically building a massive, literate workforce that was ready to walk right into a factory. Meanwhile, India did the opposite. Their whole game was quality for the few. They built these world-class universities and institutes. The result? By the 1980s, a staggering 60% of their adult population still couldn't read or write. Their university graduates were often trained in humanities and social sciences, creating a skilled elite perfect for the service sector, but it left the vast majority of the population behind. And you can see this difference clear as day in the data. Before the 1980s, 35% of China's college grads were engineers. In India, that number was a tiny 5%. Meanwhile, a whopping 60% of Indian graduates were in fields like humanities and social sciences. They were building two completely different types of workforces. So you see, these weren't just minor policy tweaks. These were fundamental, fork-in-the-road decisions that shaped the entire structure of their labor force. One was broad and practical, the other was narrow and academic. And this difference is exactly what set the stage for the dramatic split that was about to happen. Okay, so this brings us to the final act of the story. This is where those deep-rooted differences in their people and their human capital really came to a head, and the race changed forever. For about a quarter of a century, they were running side by side. It was an even match. But then, right around that 27-year mark in its timeline, China found a whole other gear and just took off. I mean, the scale of this acceleration is just mind-blowing. For its first 27 years of reform, China's GDP per person grew at a respectable 3.6% a year. But in the 13 years after that, it grew at an insane 12.3% per year. That's not just growth, that's like strapping a rocket to your economy. So what happened? Why the sudden split? Well, China went all in on globalization. They joined the World Trade Organization and built these hyper-efficient coastal cities designed for global trade. And crucially, their massive, literate workforce was ready to make the jump from the farm to the factory. India, on the other hand, was what you'd call a reluctant globalizer. Their cities were less efficient for trade, and that high illiteracy rate meant millions of people were basically trapped in low-paying farm work, unable to make that same leap. And all of this leaves us with a huge question for the future. China's strategy of building a broad base of educated workers fueled a manufacturing miracle. India's strategy of creating a high peak of elite graduates fueled a powerful services sector. But as we look ahead, which of these blueprints, the broad base or the high peak, is actually the better bet for winning the 21st century?